Good morning, everyone. I'm Dr. Sophia Rothschild, and this is the Dr. Sophia Rothschild Show. With me today, we have the very the Right Honorable uh, Supervisor Matt Dorsey from District 6 in San Francisco.
It is.
Supervisor, welcome.
Thank you so much, Sophia.
Um, Let me want to begin by follow up and go back and talk about them. I've been walking the district and I've been seeing some major improvements. The streets are getting cleaner. The issues with the tents are disappearing. So to bring things up to speed, could you bring us up to date as to what further steps have been taken to continue to improve on public safety?
Sure. So I really do appreciate that Mayor Lurie is prioritizing street disorder. Much of it is, especially the drug-driven public drug use variety. This is something that has been a priority for me. It was largely why I asked for this job 3 years ago. Sometimes when I hear from residents that they see things getting better, I always want to caution them. It is the nature of drug market interventions that they usually go in three different stages of disruption, dismantling, and deterrence. So sometimes you'll often hear people say that the strategy is to disrupt, dismantle, and deter. That's actually a sequence. And right now, I think we're still in the disrupt phase. So there might be times that you see a block or two is going to look better, but it's not impossible that some blocks will also get worse. I think what's going to be the measure of our success in the months to come is if we're doing an effective job of dismantling it. I think that's going to take a combination of recovery services to give people an alternative to public drug use on the street, doubling down on homeward bound and things that we're investing in if people who are come here have an opportunity to go back to where they're from, to be with their families. And then three, at some point, and I think the mayor has been consistent about this, we have to move toward having a zero tolerance policy when it comes to public drug use. This is robbing our residents of the safe enjoyment of their own communities. But more than that, nothing we are doing to tolerate or enable public drug use is helping anybody who is on the street at the end of the rope and addicted to drugs that are deadlier than ever before. So I think we do have to have more coercive interventions, and that includes making arrests. So I think we're moving in the right direction. San Francisco has to scale up a lot of treatment, a lot of services, and jail capacity. And I think there's also and I would say this isn't unique to San Francisco. I think the challenge that 21st century cities are going to face is having custodial detox stabilization and treatment to get people on the other side of their addiction so that then they can start to stabilize.
Yeah, excellent. And to provide a little bit, also with public safety, the issue ties in with the issue of housing. I noticed that in the past, since I've been here, there have been talk about there's a lot of units that are vacant that are not being on the rental market. Do you have any? Does the board supervisors have any plan to provide people with incentives to put those vacant units on the rental market?
I'm glad you asked, because one of the things that I'm going to be working on in the weeks to come, and in fact, right after this interview, I'm going to be meeting with a deputy city attorney to talk about some concerns that I have. One thing that worries me as we are gearing up to do rezoning, and hopefully we will start seeing progress on housing production, I want to make sure that we're not losing residential housing units to the short-term rental or tourist market. Several years ago, when I was in the city attorney's office, we saw an advent of online businesses. Things like, we saw, Uber and Lyft, and then but there was also Airbnb and VRBO that were taking residential units off the residential marketplace because it's often more lucrative for people to offer these as short-term rentals for tourist uses. I think we have to make sure that this time, as we are increasing housing capacity, that we do more to make sure that we are never again losing those residential opportunities to tourist rentals. And I think that accounts for a lot of the vacancies that we have, because there's strong limitations on how often somebody can have a residential unit. In some ways, we have policies in our city that have incentivized that. I think we need to do everything that we can, carrots and sticks, some combination of that, to make sure that we are encouraging people to return these to the residential marketplace for San Franciscans who want to live here, and not just tourists who want to visit.
And that's a very good point. Now, I noticed that some countries, they decide that, okay, you got to the people who are unhoused, they, instead of building shelters, they just put on and build housing units. For example, to get a shelter, you have to either buy the building or lease the building, and then you have to also pay for non-profits to staff it, and you know, pay for provide food and all that for the members. That's very expensive. And people are saying that why not just take the money and build housing like what they did in Utah, and those who need medical, psychological attention, they get it on site and so forth. What do you think of that approach?
I think I support that approach. It's generally, it sounds like what you're describing is the housing first policy that California has enacted, and that has really in the last 20 years been the way that many local governments are approaching the issue of unsheltered homelessness. There is a live debate right now on housing first in terms of the way that California legislated it back in 2016. My predecessor on the Board of Supervisors, Matt Dorsey, just succeeded in passing legislation that is going to the governor, and hopefully by the time people see this, the governor will have signed it, knock wood. But he is enabling California law to fund recovery and drug-free permanent supportive housing options. The way that California wrote housing first back in 2016, it effectively banned recovery and drug-free options. One defining element of housing first is to eliminate barriers to housing. We don't want to ask someone to get sober before they're eligible for housing. Yeah. And I understand why we want to have low barrier house. Let's get people off the street and into housing. I think that's the model that we're going for. Unfortunately, California wrote it in a way that effectively banned drug-free and recovery housing. That was in defiance of guidance from the Obama administration in 2015 that housing first should include recovery-oriented options. There's a lot of people who are exiting homelessness who are also struggling with substance use disorders. This is personal to me. It's as a recovering addict myself. This is why I want to work on these policies. So I'm doing everything that I can, and Matt Dorsey is doing everything he can to make sure that we still keep true to the principles of housing first, but we do it in a way that serves people who want options that are drug-free and recovery-oriented.
Okay. Along that lines, that's rolled into the idea of police, and I know that they've been talking about getting more police.
Yeah.
What's any update on that?
So Mayor Lurie has a Rebuilding the Ranks program. I had tried to do this a couple of years ago with a charter amendment that would basically require that we invest in bonuses and spending more money to buy our way out of this. Now, one of the reasons that I felt we should do that is, one, a city that is as invested in being safe and welcoming and clean to tourists and conventions. So much of our economy depends on that. It really goes to our bottom line. When we start getting a perception that the world sees that we're not a safe or welcoming place to be, that starts hurting our tourism business, and that starts hurting our bottom line on the budget. The other thing that is very frustrating, and I say this as a member of the Board of Supervisors who also is the vice chair of the Budget Committee, we're not saving money by having fewer cops. It means that we have to spend a fortune in overtime. Way more money than we should be spending. And overtime is time and a half. That means we're actually using taxpayer dollars to spend more money for less policing.
Yeah.
And that's not the way to run a city.
Exactly.
So I feel really strongly we need to be solving our public safety staffing crisis. Police are the biggest problem, but it's also sheriffs and 911 dispatchers. Mayor Lurie is taking a holistic approach on this. He's got a plan called Rebuilding the Ranks that I really support. And some of it is recruiting, some of it is getting lateral people to, you know, from other departments to sort of mid-career transfers in. But then there's some things that we can do that are kind of a little bit in the weeds that may not be obvious to people, like, for example, investing in physical therapy and training to make sure that officers are in physical condition when they're in the police academy to stay in the police academy. Right now, we have a fail-out rate within our academy that's unacceptably high. I think we can be doing a better job of working with the people who are coming into our police academy. We want to make sure that we get the majority of them on the other side of that so that they're well-trained police officers. San Francisco has very high standards to be a police officer here. You know, it's harder to be a police officer in San Francisco. So it doesn't surprise me that we have a failure rate that's maybe a little higher than other jurisdictions. But right now, our failure rate is just extraordinarily high. I mean, I think at one point we were getting 50 or 60 recruits in, but we would have a dozen graduates, and that's not acceptable. So something is wrong in the way that we are doing that. So I think doing more to make sure that we are working with recruits. These are people who want to be police officers, and there's fewer of those anyway. So when we have somebody in there, we want to make sure that they're set up for success. So some of those things that we can do may not be as obvious, but making sure that we're supporting people who are in the academy, I think, will help a lot.
Yeah, excellent. With that being said, is there any way to provide incentives for police from other departments to come to San Francisco? Because I know that other departments are actively recruiting our police officers.
Yeah. So my understanding is that in the last contract negotiation with the Police Officers Association under Mayor Breed, the salaries for police officers did go up. That is something that is contributing to some significant success in terms of what are called lateral hires, people who are in the middle of their career in other jurisdictions.
Okay.
I like that we're having success there. Obviously, other jurisdictions don't love it because we're taking their cops. But listen, we're in a competitive environment. What is at the root of the police staffing crisis, and it's not unique to San Francisco, is first of all the labor market itself is just getting smaller. We're sort of in a demographic phenomenon where the workforce is getting smaller. More people are going into retirement. There's this baby boom, sort of reaching retirement age. I'm the first year of Generation X, and I'm 5 or 6 years or 7 years away from retirement. So we're looking at a disproportionately large generational cohort of police officers reaching retirement age. So we're in a very competitive environment. San Francisco, I think, luckily has the money to spend on that. And I would also argue, and I say this as a downtown supervisor who represents the convention center and the ballpark and the Warriors and everything. Like we can't skimp on public safety because that's our bottom line.
Could you talk to us a bit about your issues dealing with your plans to provide housing for recovery individuals?
Yeah. So Board President Raphael Mandelman and I last year started working on legislation that would create drug-free and recovery housing options within our permanent supportive housing portfolio. And earlier when I talked about housing first, basically what that means is housing first is a principle that there should be no barriers to getting people off the street and into housing, including people who are actively using drugs. The way that California wrote its law is that the use of illicit drugs shall not be grounds for eviction. The supportive services that are offered to people in permanent supportive housing are required to take a harm reduction approach that is non-judgmental about drug use. And unfortunately, while that is good for some people, it's not good for everyone. And I hear from a lot of people who are in permanent supportive housing who are also struggling to stay sober, who are also in recovery. I also hear from people who are not in recovery but don't want to be in an environment where people are using drugs. In fairness to the legislature in 2016, when they passed Housing First, the deadliest, most consequential drug we were talking about then was heroin. Today, we're talking about fentanyl, which is deadlier than any drug that we were ever foreseeing. The overdose rate in permanent supportive housing is unacceptably high. As we stand here today, in the last 5 or 6 years, 26% of our overdose fatalities citywide happen in permanent supportive housing. That's unacceptable. So we're going to create, if our legislation passes, it will create 3 categories of permanent supportive housing. One would be the traditional drug-tolerant housing that is mandated by the current core components of California's Housing First, that we're not going to evict people for using drugs. The other would be a category that is just drug-free. That means you can, if it's legal, if it's alcohol or marijuana, it's sort of California sober. You get to use that, but the use of illicit drugs on site would be grounds for eviction, and there would be an expectation that if you want to move in here, you can't use illicit drugs. We're not going to evict anybody onto the street for using drugs, but you're going to be moved to a different place where that is acceptable behavior. And the third category would be recovery supportive housing, and those would be housing units for people who are in recovery and who have a diagnosed substance use disorder. Recovery housing goes back much further than Housing First ever did. There is a national alliance of recovery residences that has best practices, and SAMHSA, which is the federal agency that handles guidance, providing data and clinical guidance on how to run sober living environments and recovery housing. There's 4 different levels of recovery housing that go from self-governing, sort of low barrier things to having an on-site clinician. So there's different options that we should be providing. And one other feature of the legislation is we often struggle with how much recovery housing should we have, how much drug-free housing should we have, and how much drug-tolerant housing should we have. The legislation is going to require the Department of Homelessness and Supportive Housing to survey our population. We can find out what those numbers are. Sorry.
No problem. Yes. Another thing that keep coming up is that a lot of people say, okay, they went to jail, they did their time, they come back out. No, they can't get a job can't get back on their feet. So what time? A lot of times they fall right back into crime.
Yeah.
So I recidivism. So
Right.
So how in that regard, how are you gonna deal with what plans do you have to address that?
So one of the things that has been really interesting to me as a policymaker who was really motivated to come into public office and work on recovery priorities is that it's very similar to reentry priorities. Both recovery from substance use disorder and reentry from criminal behavior or coming out of incarceration. Often there's an overlap where drug use is part of it. But what is more important is there is also an abiding principle that we are better than our worst decisions, and everybody deserves a second chance. I am lucky in District 6 to have nonprofits like United Players that does some phenomenal work when people come out. People who have done their time and now they have an opportunity to give back. And there's a lot of people who are finding purpose in doing that, giving back. But we as a city and as a government and as a society also have to make sure when somebody has fulfilled their debt to society, we have to make sure that we're giving them a second chance. Everybody deserves that. That's true whether you're in recovery or reentry. But the underlying principles, I think, are very much the same.
Yeah. And yes, I've seen the United players all the time, and they doing amazing work.
Yeah.
And they really rock stars in that area.
Yeah.
So talk to us about going forward. Is another thing people keep saying is that yeah, there's a lot at City Hall. There's a lot of bloat. For example, especially the area of non-profits that get funded from the city, there's a lot of blows that they get now. These high, exorbitant pay to their executives and their employees, and they have little or nothing to show for it. What plan do you have to have them accountable?
This is a really important question, and this is going to be the challenge that the city is going to face over the next several years. We have a structural deficit. Even if we don't spend any more money than we're spending, if we were just to keep things even, we're going to have a structural budget deficit that approaches $1 billion unless we can find a way to shrink the budget. There's a couple of ways to do that. One is we can make government smaller, eliminate more positions, lay off city employees, reduce public services. There's also, in my view, a significant amount of waste and inefficiency in our contracting. Some, but not all of that, has to do with nonprofits. But I would argue that the more significant and more wasteful portion of our contracting is that we are, by design, making competitive bidding less competitive. And Supervisor Mandelman has been working on contracting and procurement reforms that would eliminate the impact of some of the onerous requirements that we have built in, the social policy objectives that we have built into our contracting, so that they won't apply to low dollar contracts. I support that. I think it's an incremental step. But I'm also aware, and I feel really strongly about this. In the last 6 years, we have declared 3 emergencies. One for COVID, Mayor Breed's Tenderloin Emergency Initiative, and then the fentanyl emergency under Mayor Lurie. For the most part, those emergencies were about getting out of our own way and creating exceptions to our own city policies, mostly for contracting. If we're having an emergency every time we need to fix a problem to get out of our own way with our own policies, we have to have a candid discussion about what's wrong with our policies. Some of those policies completely prohibit bid participation, and one of the worst offenders is the Equal Benefits Ordinance, which I supported back in the 90s. This was a law that basically said you can't bid on a city contract unless you provide domestic partner benefits that are equal to what you're providing to married couples. I say this as a gay man. There was a time, this was a priority number 1 for the gay community, because gay and lesbian couples didn't have access to marriage equality. We didn't have access to marriage rights. 10 years ago, we won that right. And while it may be the case that I worry about some of what the Supreme Court may do, we could enact a reform that would enable companies that don't offer domestic partnership benefits to participate in our competitive bidding, to make competitive bidding more competitive. Right now, it isn't. Right now, we're in a situation where 46% of our bid solicitations for goods, services, and construction contracts come back with 0 or 1 bidder. So we're not only minimizing competition, we're eliminating it in nearly half of all cases. There's basically $5.3 billion in contracting money that we spend in our $16 billion budget. And then there's about $7.2 billion that we spend on wages and benefits for our city workers. I am convinced we get more value, more bang for our buck from our city workers than our contractors. So I want to do everything I can to get as much value out of our contracting as we can. Let's squeeze that and make it more competitive and get the prices of our goods and services and construction contracts down.
Yeah, that's that. If you don't fix a problem, you're gonna see businesses start to leave, and people start to leave, and it's like that. And with less and less taxpayers, you gotta keep raising price of things to compensate, and it's smaller. So I like that plan you have. Now, I know you have to go, so let me close up with this. Where do you see the city in, say, 10 years?
10 years is a long time. I have, what I am hearing is that we are going to be in a good period of growth with AI. I will say I have a little bit of nervousness because I have been around technology economies for a long time. I grew up in Massachusetts, and this was in the city where I grew up. Digital Equipment Corporation was this back in the 80s. This was the biggest employer. Wang Computer was a giant. These were giants of the industry, and now they're gone.
Yeah.
So I have seen technology economies through booms and busts. I was also here in San Francisco, part of one that was inside the market during the dot-com era and the Y2K phase. So I have seen spikes in technology-driven booms. I think we're on the cusp of another one with AI. I am hearing from economists that this one has better fundamentals than the dot-com boom. I'll believe it when I see it. If you ask me, where do I see us in 5 years? I would say I think we're going to be doing very well. I think the economy is going to be booming, but we have to be prepared, because what that means is we're changing one set of problems for another, and affordability is going to be the next big thing, and we have to make sure that everybody is coming along and that we're not pricing our own San Francisco residents out of their own apartments.
Yeah.
That means we got to do more to protect renters, expand rent control, expand the housing stock for renters, for people who are coming here, and do more, as I said before, to make sure that we're not losing residential units to tourist rentals.
Yeah. Right. Well, Supervisor Matt Dorsey, thank you so much, and it's always a pleasure. And
Thank you, Sophia.
and I look forward to many more years of working with you. And you are a rock star.
Well, I appreciate it.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you.